two numbers, 50 and 36. 50,000 interpreters left behind, one killed every 36 hours, according to UNHCR. The political, physical, and psychological risks faced by interpreters and translators. It's a very broad subject. I think I might have narrowed it when I started, but I'm going to do my best. It is by no means a comprehensive talk. Good morning, everyone. My name is, for those of you I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is David Violet. I'm a conference interpreter and a trainer of interpreters. I live in San Mateo, California. I started my interpreting career in Paris, where I lived for 2 years, from 1986 to 1988. I then decided I wanted to come back to the United States. I'm from California. I've always loved it here, and I ended up here now, and I'm very happy about that. So when I came back to the United States, I figured out that the best thing for me to do was to go to Washington, D.C. I lived in Adams Morgan. I think many of you can recognize that area there. I was there from 1988 to 1994, working as a conference interpreter. Then I decided I needed another change, and I decided to move on, and I got into United Nations peacekeeping. I worked in 3 United Nations peacekeeping missions. Rwanda, 1994, Angola for 4.5 years, 94 to 99, and Kosovo from 1999 to 2000. Then I decided I wanted to leave Kosovo, go back to conference interpreting, so I decided, hey, I'm going to go back to Paris, have a good life, get away from all these conflict situations. That's when I joined AIC. I'm very happy to have done so. So I worked as a conference interpreter in Paris from 2000 to 2005. And then I got a call from someone that I had known in Washington who invited me to come to work at the International Criminal Court, where I worked as a staff, full-time interpreter, translator, and reviser for 1 year. And this will be very pertinent along with the peacekeeping experience to my talk. Then I decided I wanted to come back to California again, so here I came back and I taught at the Institute here for 3 semesters. And once you've lived in California, it's hard to get used to other places. And now I am a freelance IE conference interpreter and trainer in San Francisco. I would just love so much to be able to walk around a bit. And I happened to arrive last night from Colombia. Got home at 11 p.m. and drove down here this morning, so if I'm a little bit off, please forgive me. The political risks of being an interpreter and translator. There's a film, a Hollywood movie, that I think probably half of you at least have seen. It portrays a bunch of soldiers on a mission, and one of them is the so-called translator, the translator-interpreter. This person ends up playing a very bad role. He is a coward, and his cowardice leads to several of his colleagues getting killed, and he even ends up shooting a captive in cold blood. And you may have guessed it's Saving Private Ryan by Steven Spielberg. One of the characters everyone hates. Turns out it's an interpreter, translator, which I liked very much. Good thing there's the huge hero of the whole thing, Tom Hanks. He was a school teacher. I thought that was nice. So we have something related to the public imagination, relating to what an interpreter is. Something that Spielberg thought would resonate. I wonder why that is. Why is it that the translator would be the coward, the traitor, One theory is, and I'll go over it in a minute, is that we as interpreters are always at the meeting point between two cultures, two languages, and in a conflict situation, two sides. I can tell you that in the UN, when I was working in peacekeeping, the UN, regardless of whether it was interpreting or not, we were always supposedly neutral, but we were always seen as being partial in favor to the other side. Does that happen to interpreters? There's another example. We've seen one example now from Hollywood. How about history? This is Malinche. When Hernan Cortez set out to conquer the Aztecs in Mexico in 1519, he needed an interpreter. Malinche was a local native who knew the language and became his interpreter translator. And she also ended up giving him military information about the Aztecs and ended up actually fathering his son. So here we have an example of that history gives us, presumably, apparently, of the interpreter-translator being unfaithful somehow at this meeting between two worlds. And guess what? So we have something from Hollywood, we have something from history. These are just short examples. I took a look at the Central Intelligence Agency website, and what do they say? They say that it's obvious and a time-honored practice to use interpreters as spies. So we're getting a further confirmation of this bad image of interpreters. When I was in Angola, in this 4.5-year period, this is Maître Alioune Blondambe. He's somebody who's sort of been forgotten, but he actually died in a plane crash. And I was often his interpreter, and I would often fly around with him. We're talking about the dangers, political dangers of being an interpreter-translator. I could have easily been in the plane when his plane crashed. When I ended up being the head of the language service for the mission, and I would go out myself, but I would also send people out. And one, our dear friend, Ralph Wadi, came back saying that, well, UNITA, who were the rebels there in Angola, I don't know who remembers that history very well, but the UNITA commander put his pistol on the table after Ralph had flown in on his Casa Spanish plane, landed on a dirt airstrip, and probably taken a helicopter even further out, a Russian helicopter, where the pilots were frequently a little bit drunk. The UNITA commander had put his pistol on the table and said, "Você não sai daqui." You are not leaving here if you don't do a good job. Dangerous of being an interpreter, translator. When again, the UNITA person saw him as being on the other side, or potentially favoring the other side. In Kosovo, the United Nations had a police force. So they were bringing in police officers from all over the world who clearly did not speak the language. This is the case everywhere, right? When they have a peacekeeping mission or a military operation, you need someone who can speak the language. Before I left, I decided to quit the UN. Finally, I had my third mission. I wanted to get out of that and get back to conference interpreting back in Paris. But when I told them that, I said, please do one thing for us. Go out there and train all these police interpreters. So this is a picture of one of the regional headquarters police stations. I went to all of them, all 5, and I did training for these police interpreters. Who are these police interpreters? They are people that someone said, hey, you speak English, you can be my interpreter. Okay, they might have had a little bit more of an actual recruitment and filtering process than that, but I can tell you that it was not far from that. Because how do you find hundreds and hundreds of interpreters in a small country like Kosovo? So I went out there and did a role play. And I wanted to teach them, well, basics. These are people who are maybe English students somewhere, or maybe they just learned by listening to songs. to use the first person, to be neutral, not get involved in conversations, respect confidentiality, the basics. And I taught this by doing role plays. I would go out and I would be the UN policeman. One of the interpreter's trainees would be the interpreter, and another interpreter trainee would be the interrogated citizen. So I would ask a question. I, the policeman, would, in the role play, ask a question of the Kosovar, and the interpreter would interpret that, and we would do a little role play, and we would see how things went, and I would illustrate how to be professional in these role plays. And one of the main things they would say is, you know, they always say to us, why are you siding with this policeman? You're one of us. Why, interpreter, are you siding with the policeman? You're one of us. You're my countryman. Again, we see that the interpreter, at least in a conflict situation, is frequently seen as impartial and siding with the other side. So these examples from peacekeeping. Now an example from an actual court case in the United States that you may know. Mohammed Yusri interpreted for the defense in a terrorism case against a defendant who was accused of having been behind several attacks in New York. He was eventually accused himself and prosecuted, accused of aiding terrorism. He spent 16 months in prison, and in 2011, when he had spent those 16 months, he said, never in a million years did I imagine that anything like that would happen. Not only was I sent to prison, but because of my criminal record, my interpreter career, my translator career, and my academic career are ruined. The dangers, political dangers of being an interpreter, translator. There's even a saying in Italian, actually, traditore, sorry, I don't speak Italian. It's more refers to the fact that it's very hard to translate something without leaving something out of it, if not in the meaning, in the structure. But there is this saying. Okay, now let's get back to the good side. We know that the world would not go around without interpreters and translators. These UN police, these military that went into Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, they couldn't do anything without interpreters. They had interpreters embedded into each platoon. There's an example of an interpreter who was evacuated from Kigali in April 1994 as the genocide started, and when they called him back, he hesitated a great deal, but there he is on the bottom right, next to General Roman Dallaire, going back to interpret for ceasefire talks. So, and you may recognize that interpreter. It's yours truly. But I would not compare that in any way to these 50,000 left behind, being killed at the rate of one every 36 hours. You can help. Well, let's look at this. There is the interpreter. He's covering his face. He doesn't want to be known as an interpreter. And around them are the military. So they are questioning someone to make sure you can probably go through a checkpoint of some sort. Again, here's an interpreter seen as siding by his population with the other side, the invaders. There's a movement to help these people. And part of my talk today is to ask you to join in that movement. AIC, the International Association of Conference Interpreters, the International Federation of Translators, and Red T, among others, are behind a movement. First of all, you can use that QR code there. You can download this field manual for how to work with interpreters. There is a fight also being waged to get the United Nations to acknowledge the importance of interpreters and the fact that they are being targeted as interpreters. More, I would think, than cooks, drivers, others. because they were seen, for the reasons I've outlined above, as siding with the other side, as being traitors and worthy of punishment. So we want the United Nations to acknowledge that they need special protection. And let me cite you the example of journalists. Journalists have succeeded. First, they had to get organized, and this goes back to Luigi's talk. How do you get organized? How do you get people to protect you if you're not organized, if you're not part of a professional association? So please join in this. I wanted to say, I did not do the research to this extent, but you can be sure that if journalists got this done, it was through their professional associations. They couldn't do it alone. They did it. Resolution 2222 from 2015 asks all member states to recognize and to protect the important work of journalists and the fact that they are targeted. It should be the same. What about translators and interpreters? Left behind, 50,000. This was a couple years ago that these statistics go to, but 50,000 left behind, being killed at a rate of 1 every 36 hours. How much time, Brian?
You still have to. 6 this month.
Thank you. There's another example. Many soldiers, American and French and others, have tried to get them visas, but they cannot get them at a rate that really helps them. The European Parliament has gone so far as to endorse a UN resolution to protect these interpreters and translators. And there is a link, by the way, at the end of my talk you'll see my email. If you'd like me to send you this, I would be very happy to. You can use these links. You can, if you want to right now, you can take a picture of this code and it will take you to the page where you can watch this video. It's a video about 2 guys who are trying to get into Europe because they cannot survive back home. Sorry, skip through that. Right. Red T is one of the organizations, and by using this code here, you'll be able to go to the website and please sign the petition to get the United Nations to pass a resolution protecting journalists, protecting translators and interpreters the same way they have protected journalists. How would journalists do their work? How would they do it without interpreters and translators? That's for the political side. Next, we're going to move on. As I said, I think I bit off a little bit too much for this time. We're going to the physical side, and it's only going to be about your ears. When you are in, I'm going to have to speed up, I'm sorry, but it's very important that nearly 25% of the interpreters working for the Canadian federal government have had symptoms related directly to their work. When you are listening through your headphones, this is what I'm referring to mainly. There are many things that you can do not to ruin your ears. Anybody know these people?
Oh, yeah.
Who are they?
And Christopher Tiffany.
Right. So Leskovich, probably the most famous interpreter there is, I would think. Foremost pedagogue and researcher, interpreter, very important, so much so that AIC uses her name for the most prestigious prize in interpreting for the person who did the most for the profession, who happens to be gracing us with his honor today, Luigi, with his presence today. And on the right is Christophe Thierry, who was, when I was going to AZ, was Mitterrand's interpreter. They both, the reason I'm showing them today is they both had different theories about the headsets. So Leskovich always said, you just put one on and you can hear fine, and then with the other ear, for those of you who are not interpreters, you have to be able to hear what you're saying through your ear, not through your head. And she would say, you can even adjust the volume by moving it around. Thierry would say, I don't get it. I just don't get it. I have 2 ears. Why would I not forgo one of my ears? So he would put both on partially. And that way you're able to hear the original in both ears and hear your own through through both ears as well.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out that there are some people saying that it's best to do both ears because you will not have to turn it up as loud because you're able to hear it through 2 ears, and the theory goes that you will not have to turn it up so loud and thereby preserve your ears. I'm not sure what the scientific basis is, but I thought I might mention that. Another theory is that you should keep, as this slide shows, turn the treble up and turn the bass down. Turning the treble up gives you more information. That's where you can distinguish better between the fricatives and all the syllables, by turning down the bass, you get less volume. So by turning up the treble and down the bass, you're going to get more information per volume. The whole idea, as Diddy would always say, is you lower the volume as low as it possibly can go while still being able to hear the entire message. Mm-hmm. That was his sentence. That's what I remember. This is actually the headphones that I was using in Colombia. So treble, not bass, cover both ears, avoid whiplash. What I mean by that is if this is one of the Canadian interpreters said this in the article I read, sometimes you don't hear anything, or the person goes away from the microphone and you turn it up. What do you know? The guy over here turns his on. He's right here, and he shouts. So this one's gone away, you've turned it up, and that guy turns it on and shouts, and you get a bang. But the worst bangs are not like that. The worst bangs are the system. There can be an explosive noise, and that's what they call acoustic shock. And there have been several cases of that, apparently among the Canadians, probably everywhere, but they have enough sense to actually do an article and a report about it. That's what I'm calling whiplash. You start compensating for no sound and it comes back. I'm sorry, that's one of the phenomena. You could also think about getting decibel limiting earphones. I don't have them, but they do exist for children. I've seen it all over, because people want their kids not to ruin their ears as they listen to music. I haven't found any that interpreters saying are really the quality we need, but things are changing very fast, so look for them. Another recommendation, as students, as interpreters, watch out for each other. If you see your colleague is shouting into his microphone, it may be that it's so loud that he doesn't realize that he's shouting, which means he or she is ruining her ears. So watch out for each other and ask others to watch out for you. Number 7, get involved. Join AIC, join ATA, join TALS, join somebody, and know what's going on. Boy, I guess I've run out of time. I'm sorry. I did practice this. What is the penalty? Do I can go over 2 minutes or?
Take 2 minutes.
2 minutes, thank you. Thank you very much. Use earplugs, avoid loud music, use sound canceling earphones, because that will mean that you will, if you have a lot of outside sound and you're listening to music, you will turn it up to hear your music or watch your movie on the plane. Use sound canceling and noise canceling and you will not be turning it up. There's something called filtered earplugs. I have not looked into that very much. There's an article here by my friend Cyril. You can get it by using that QR code, which tells you a lot more about that. Now let's move on to the psychological. The main thing here is going to be about how to avoid secondary post-traumatic stress disorder. In other words, for example, when I was at the International Criminal Court, they hired a team of psychologists to come and tell us that you are being exposed to horrendous testimony, and believe me, we were. You would hear horrible things, and so you can actually get secondary post-traumatic stress disorder by hearing all these things. What we were told was the main thing is don't hold it inside. You need to talk about it. You can talk about it with the others who heard the same thing, or you can talk about it with a therapist. And of course, the recommendation always is to see a professional. When I was evacuated from Kigali, we also had a team. By coincidence, completely separate team, 5 years apart, that said the same thing. Do not hold it in. When you hear or experience very traumatic things, you need to talk to somebody, probably a therapist. Here's a series of recommendations that I have. Again, if you send me an email, I will send you this. There's a code here on the bottom right where you can actually download a bunch of recommendations here about how to prevent secondary or primary post-traumatic stress disorder. So we've gone through all three: political, physical, and psychological. I'm sorry I ran out of time. I think I bit off way too much. I could have given one talk on any one of those. And please, again, if you want to send me your requests, I'll send you these slides. Thank you.